All right, welcome to the Eddie V live show. I am Eddie V, your host, and we are in Tuesday of the Easter octave. Happy Easter to all of you. And just to let you know, this is probably the third time I'm trying to record this. So hopefully it's working. We didn't have volume the first time, we didn't have video the second time. So hopefully now we are good to go. It looks like we're good. So I will keep going. But this is the third time. The first time I caught it, the second time I caught it pretty early after a couple minutes. But if I sound peeved, it's because I'm repeating myself a little bit. But we're going to have a good show today. It is daytime over here. The jets are flying, if you hear that. But that is okay. We're going to continue on. Couple topics I want to talk about today. First, and maybe the only one we'll get to because I'm a little aggrieved, aggravated right now. But the first one is Catholic education. And then we might get to the other ones, which have to do with Incarnate Creed and the Mass, and then also a discussion of simplicity or complexity with the liturgical rites of the church, the other sacraments as well. I don't know if I'll get to that one, honestly, but we'll get into it. In the news, I was talking about it already, and when I realized we didn't have volume, but the Iran thing seems to be coming to a head, but we'll see. In the media, it's hard to tell what's going on. But when you watch this, something crazy might have happened, but maybe not. I think in America, we're safe right now, honestly. But in terms of world news, I think this will be a big deal. But that doesn't have to do with what we're talking about tonight or today. So we'll skip over that. So Catholic education. So what does that have to do with? First of all, if you don't know, the Catholic Church, we have Catholic schools in America. These are schools in theory that are run by the church, by the diocese. I've actually figured out that there are Catholic schools that are technically not run by the diocese. So that's interesting. And so they keep like the title of Catholic, not necessarily in like the name of the school, but they are called a Catholic school, but they are not associated or not under the diocese, which is really interesting. Those exist. It seems that they're very rare though. Like where I live, I think there's like one or two. So it's compared to maybe 20 Catholic schools. So those exist, and we won't really talk about those, but we'll talk about the ones under the diocese. And just to offer my personal opinion, and we'll talk about this more, is that I don't think it's going very well in terms of Catholic education. I've been around it, I've worked in it before, and from what I've experienced and what I've heard from other people and other people's experiences, it's not going great. And maybe the same milieu that has taken over all of society is also in the Catholic schools. So we'll talk about that. So first I want to talk about like what is the goal of Catholic schools, Catholic education. My thoughts on it would be you want to have a person, you want to set a child up to be a saint with Catholic education. And first, let's talk about Catholic education just in the idea that you want to, as Catholics, we want to educate properly our children. And who is the primary educator of children? It is actually not the church that is the primary educator of children, nor is it a school. The parents are the primary educator of children. And this is very straightforward in the new catechism, the 1990s catechism from St. John Paul II, that the parents are the primary educator of children. So you can kind of see, and we'll walk through a little bit how that eventually gets to a point where like kids are going into a school, like a school as we know it today, a elementary, even preschool now is just crazy, but elementary, middle school, and high school. And then there are Catholic colleges too. So the parents are the primary educator of their children. And what do they want to teach them? What is the end? Hopefully it's that they be a saint. And what does that involve? That involves knowing Jesus Christ, developing a relationship with Jesus Christ, with God, with the triune God, obviously with Mother Mary, Saint Joseph, the saints, knowing about church history in general, basic skills, reading, writing. People would argue maybe there's more to that. Math, chemistry, all that jazz. I'm trying to think of other ones. Literature, yeah, all those things. And but those for the sake of being a well-rounded person, virtue, life skills, job skills, stuff like that. I think all that falls under Catholic education. But I would say the primary, those are all under the um, main goal of becoming a saint, and all those are very secondary. So that's Catholic education. And then, so to supply that, and this probably starts with the rise of, I would say, uneducated laity, and maybe like an advancement of civilization where like there's a high amount of education that is required or desired by civilization in general and by countries. What do I mean by that? Well, before modern time, which a lot of people probably consider at different times, 17th, 18th century, some people even push it to 19th century, where we have this, almost like a hyper advancement of civilization in terms of technology and technological wherewithal, where no longer can everyone, because before that, a massive amount of people were peasants, which does not mean like what we think today, but it means they managed the land. They were people that managed land. They have a bunch of kids, and what are the kids expected to do? They're expected to do something similar, right? There's a little bit of options, but not much, and it's very people nowadays don't like it. They don't like the idea of like, oh, there wasn't really a lot of career option, basically. But in that milieu, the mother or the father who are teaching their children, they don't have to teach them complex chemistry, or they don't have to teach them calculus or anything like that for this person to be able to fulfill their duties in life. But once you get past that time of life where peasantry becomes less pervasive in society, and now we have very specialized jobs. I would argue because of technology, maybe there's some other factors there as well. Kind of the changing of the state of things, warfare, which I guess is technological too, changes a lot of things. But as we get this society that needs more technical specialization, we start doing these things where we educate children in a lot more things at younger ages. And that's what we have modern society. So now the parents might not necessarily know how to teach their kid, calculus, or even have the time to do that. And this gets into feminism and how usually at one point you had the mom and the dad usually at home for a big portion of the population. And usually the aristocracy, it seems they would whether they couldn't teach their kids or they just didn't want to, they would have like tutors. But for most of the population, you're not going to have tutors. But then we move to a point where most of the population needs to have tutors. And what do you have? You have a gathering of children to attend a school. In America, I don't know the exact dates. Maybe I should have looked them up before, but we eventually got a like mandate in the United States where people had to go to school. And a lot of these schools were Protestant. And because they were Protestant, Catholics did not feel that their kids were getting correct education. The first thing that happens is you're going to see Catholic children in America are going to a Protestant required school. Like you have to go to school. It is like mandated by the government. And those kids are going to go to school, and then the Catholic like maneuver around this was that for a religion class, you would hop out of the Protestant school and you would go to like some Catholic religion class. Eventually it got to the point where you have parochial schools, where schools are going to be Catholic schools. And so, that's kind of a little bit of the history of how we get to our current conversation where we have Catholic schools now. And this comes from that situation I just explained. And I would argue that Catholic education is basically like those Protestant schools, um, basically with like a little bit of Catholicism sprinkled in. So what do I mean by that? Those Protestant schools, when they're first created, like what are they created for? I think honestly, you know, this is a generalization, but they were made to make good workers. And you could argue, and people have argued this before, and there's a little data on it, that these schools were actually designed where you have like class one, class two, class three. In between, you have literally bells ringing to tell you, like, oh, this class is over. You need to go to your next class. And then you have a lunchtime, and everyone eats lunch together. And you have another class and another class. That structure, people have argued that that is like for factory workers. Like you're getting them ready to work in a factory, and the things they're learning are hopefully getting them ready to work in a factory. which in a factory, you don't need a lot of skills, honestly, to work in a factory. So they weren't really teaching them skills. They were teaching them obedience and like scheduling, basically. And I think whether that's historically true or not, I think that's very accurate of what the schools did is and still do to today is that all they do is create people that are able to fill out things because usually you're taught by a teacher, you read a textbook, and you basically memorize answers or memorize methods to answer questions. And then the teacher gives you a grade of how well you're able to do that. So the people that get the high grades aren't necessarily the best at comprehension. They're just the best at like putting their nose to the grindstone and being like, I'm going to figure out how to do this method exactly how the teacher wants me to, or I want to memorize the answers to the questions the teacher is asking me. And I would argue that's not very good for a lot of things, especially for creativity. You're not like really exercising problem solving, and maybe to a certain extent, you're given a problem and you have to apply a method to it in terms of problem solving, which I don't think that's very helpful in most of life. You have to be more creative in your problem solving usually. And so you create like basically a proletariat in your country, which is what the nation state kind of wants to a degree. They just want people they do want the entrepreneurs still, the creative people that can create new stuff, but they don't need a lot of them. Most of the people, they just want grunts that are going to be able to do one or two tasks very well over and over again. This is even becoming true for like software engineers, right? They just want people that can like get in there and there's going to be a creative person that's inventing the new thing, that's inventing new processes. And then they just need a bunch of other people that can just come in day out, clock in and hammer away at a couple tasks effectively and have a wherewithal the knowledge. So that's what I would argue is the current educational system is based around. And then what happened with Catholic education is we just took that model and then we say like mass sometimes during the day, or we say like, well, the church is actually really cool and here's some math. Or the church believes in truth and math tells you the truth. So like, cool. And that honestly, that sounds like very flippant, but that is honestly what it seems like we're doing. And I think that is a disservice. I think we don't want to create factory workers. I think we want to create real human beings. And the biggest thing is like, I have these thoughts of like, I don't think we should really teach our kids that like all of our kids don't need to learn chemistry. I think very few people need to learn chemistry. I think maybe if we could put kids later into school, and I'm not going to be able to talk about everything about this topic, but this is a general overlay. But I think we should put kids later into school, let them be with their parents more, if they're able to, right? Because of feminism, we have the father was and the mother were both in the home, and then they both got kicked out, and now no one's at home. Honestly, everyone should be homeschooling, but let's continue. I think kids should be able to go to school later if they have to go to school, and really the things they need to learn, I think, should be less, but they should learn those things better. The biggest thing I think is reading and writing. A lot of kids, it doesn't seem they can even read for whatever reason, technology, smartphones, what have you. But I think it would be better for a kid to be able to read and write very, very well, to be able to comprehend things very well by reading the written word, than it would be for them to like barely know how to read, but they also know a little bit of chemistry, a little bit of algebra, a little bit of history, all this stuff. I think you're setting them up for failure. So that's the first thing. And then the other thing is in the Catholic schools, we are not teaching, from my experience, we're not teaching that sainthood. We say it all the time, but we don't actually teach it or show it and what that entails. Like deep prayer. Most of the kids I've interacted with in high school, they do not know mental prayer. They do not know how to meditate. And that should be one of the first things that kids are learning as soon as they're at the age of reason. Is like, we can sit with our Lord in mental prayer. And also the virtues. Honestly, we stress so much grades that we don't teach these kids how to be good people. As long as they're getting an A in algebra, they can do whatever they want. Not do whatever they want, but we don't care about them being a virtuous person. I think that's a huge mistake. And you get the society we have now where it's like we have like one of the most prosperous civilizations, but everyone kind of sucks. It's not like some people talk about, it's like, it's not even worth living. A lot of people would they talk about, they fantasize, they're probably not telling the truth. But there's some truth to this. Is like I'd rather live in like a poor country that the living, the way of life, the lifestyle is just more invigorating. It's more good, true, and beautiful. Where that place exists, people usually say Europe, and I think there's some truth to that. And it shows you the power of Catholic culture in Europe, how it's been able to maintain this this wholesome atmosphere, even though they've shrugged off Christianity for the most part. So, what am I saying about Catholic education? I think we need to have a huge talk about how it's supposed to look, and I think homeschooling has been the big answer to this. You have homeschooling communities where they're like teaching their kids about farming, or they're teaching their kids about building houses, different things like that. And I don't think it needs to stop there because that's kind of a Luddite kind of view where they're like, oh, we have to go back, which there's some truth in that. But I think the biggest thing we can do is we can teach them the real true things first: beauty, truth, goodness in terms of reading and writing, and then they can branch off with the parents' guidance or the community's guidance of what is needed in society and how their skills can help with that. And let me give an example is because I want people to be lawyers, but I want them to be good, honest, effective lawyers. Which right now most people are lawyers, it seems, because they want to make a lot of money, which is not great. But if a kid shows early on like they would be a good lawyer, or they want to be a lawyer, at even age 10, you could start teaching them skills to be a lawyer. You don't have to wait until 18. And maybe if they're showing a little aptitude for being a lawyer, they don't have to learn complex math in high school or middle school or whatever age. And homeschooling is able to do that to a certain extent, depending on the state. There's different rules, but you could yourself teach the kid, be like, just do the bare minimum because you still usually have to do state testing, which is a bore, but not too bad. We're going to learn the state testing stuff because we need to do good on this so you can go to college or do whatever you want to do. But we're going to really focus on things, American history, American law history, reading legal documents, etc., stuff like that. And that just sounds so much more refreshing because I know from my experience in high school, I don't remember a single thing from high school. And I have an engineering background. None of the high school stuff helped me. When I went to college, I had to learn everything from scratch, and because the way my mind's set up, whether it's nature or nurture, I think it's really nature. I'm half Asian. I was just able to get it, and it was very simple to me. And I think I could have done it learning nothing in high school about math, or I could have done it with all the stuff that I supposedly memorized in high school. So I don't know that's the general position of Catholic education right now. And I want to talk about the mass in terms of the sacraments and how that's interlaid, but maybe I'll tie that in with the next subject. But I want to talk about practicals. Honestly, I think the biggest thing, it has to do with feminism too, is like we need the parents at the home as much as possible educating their own children. That is the best thing. And I think homeschooling is really the answer. I've seen some of these hybrid things. I don't really know how effective they are, but that's like a better move to me where the kids are like, you half the hours or a quarter of the hours or three-quarters of the hours are at home in terms of the modern 40-hour a week school schedule. I think that's a possible good move. Just if you want to you want to tap the different specialities that people know in your community and get them teaching your kids. I think that's really smart. But I think homeschooling, if we're talking practical, has to be the move to move the culture. And I have seen some statistics about this, about a lot of people moving to homeschool, but I don't think it's as much as we need. And I know a lot of Catholics that still send their kids to these expensive Catholic schools. It hurts me so much. It's better than public school, don't get me wrong, in certain ways. It's better in public school, the fact that it's usually better quality in terms of morals, but it's bad in terms of like they present the faith in a very lame way. So someone might think they know the Catholic faith because they went to a Catholic school, and I think that's a really bad position for them to be in. But I digress. So I think homeschooling practically is the current solution, which is really kind of what most people have done, you could argue, for a lot of history. And obviously it's a different time, so I know it's complicated. But I've actually met some homeschooling families that their kids are in very specialized fields. So it's not like they lost anything in terms of like education wise. Like people were, oh, I homeschool, they're not gonna be able to get in the best schools or the jobs and stuff like that. And I've my experience is not true. These homeschool kids are able to do the same things that public school kids do and Catholic school kids do, going through the system. The other thing is this sociability. I am, maybe an irrational opinion about this, but I don't think that people that go to public school just because they're able to like laugh a lot and party with other people, that they're more socialized. I think homeschool people are tend to be a little awkward, but I think it's like a culture. It might have to do with some sociability. I'm thinking about that, but I don't think it has to be that way. I've met homeschool people that are, very well rounded, very socially intelligent, and I met some public school people that I would argue are not. So I don't think that's a huge problem. I think it has to do with the parents talking to their children too, because even in communities, they'll try to do stuff like it's almost a public school, which I think is insane. They'll just be at home and they'll have all the curriculum lined up like it's a 40-hour public school week, which I think is insane. Do not do that. You can do your own thing. Specialize to each child. Obviously, assuming you have the time to do that, which yes, we need to take that. We need to take the home back. That's a brief little thing. I think I'm going to stop there. I'm going to move on to the next subject really quickly, which is Incarnate Creed and the Mass. And this might be the more controversial thing. And so, what is Incarnate Creed? It is embodied belief. And honestly, just to be completely honest up front, I am the Novus Ordo. I am not a huge fan of because of this. Most people, you get rad trads that are not a fan of the Novus. They say it's blasphemous or it's idolatry. These what's the word they don't use those two words. They use a different word. Sacrilegious. They're always saying the Novus Ordo is sacrilegious. I don't think it's sacrilegious. I don't think there's any basis. And you ask them why, and they don't really give you an answer. And if you are a rad trad, let me know and we can talk about it. But my big issue with the Novus Ordo is the incarnate creed aspect of it. So what is the Mass? The Mass is what I would argue the Mass is either what surrounds the consecration of the bread and wine, or it is the liturgical act that includes the consecration of the bread and wine. So I would argue it's built around that and usually separate it nowadays into the liturgy of the word, the liturgy of the Eucharist, sure, whatever. But so what would the liturgical acts around this consecration, what would you want it to do? Well, I think it should point to the belief in the true presence, which is the source and summit of the Catholic faith according to the catechism, the new catechism. Whatever is around that consecration needs to be pointing to that fact. The true presence, this is really Jesus, this really affects, this really gives grace, the Eucharist, the real body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ. So everything around that should be pointing to that. And I don't think the Novus Ordo does a good job of that. Whether it's, a lot of people will say, well, it's not the Novus Ordo per se, it's how it's celebrated. Sure, whatever. Whatever makes you feel better, makes you sleep at night. Is I think the Novus Ordo really stresses like communal meal and also like almost a Protestant Jewish vibe of like the synagogue or like the church service, where it's really based on like a lot of talking and listening. And honestly, sometimes when I'm at a Novus Ordo, like I get exhausted because like they're on a mic the whole time and it's just like droning on and on, like all these different words they want you, and then it's a homily and it's like, which homilies are great, the prayers are great, but I think we're missing the point here. It's not really like a discussion. it's something that surrounds this all holy act of consecration. And what is the Eucharist for? I think you could argue it's the union of God and man. It is the God man, and he is feeding with his own body and blood the people. So that's the meeting point. And then who is the priest? The priest and you can really see this in the older rites, and even in the East I forgot the name of it, the iconostasis, I think it's called, where it's basically that veil in front of where the priest is handling the body and blood of Christ. That separation really shows. And then I think with the priest facing away from the people in the old Latin Roman rite, it's showing that like actually what's happening is there's the priest is mediating between God and the people. Whereas now with the priest turned around and without a barrier, it seems like the priest and the people are just kind of having their own little powwow, and it's harder to see like that mediation happening. That's a little bit of a different aspect. And I think that's very Protestant Jewish, where even in the synagogue, it's like literally, the rabbis like just talking to the people about stuff. Anyway, yeah, so I think that that's a huge problem we need to address in the mass when we're thinking about culture. Because I think the mass, you could argue, and John Senior, great book, The Death of Christian Culture and the Restoration of Christian Culture are really solid books. The first one like is very technical, but I think it's still worth a good read. But talking about how the mass was actually the center of Christian culture in medieval times. And that's what everything that was like what we call Christendom flowered from this belief in the true presence, flowered from this liturgical act that really stressed the importance and the centrality of the consecration of the Lord Jesus. So I think, my personal opinion about the Novus Ordo is like I'm not a huge fan of it. I think it could be done better if you wanted to keep the Novus Ordo. I think with the current rifts, I don't know the numbers on the, in terms of SSPX instead of a contest and different things like that. But obviously we want unity. And honestly, a lot of them don't have good arguments for anything. And it is sad that they would only return to the church if they got like their liturgical and doctrinal preferences, because that's just not how it works. But for the sake of unity, I would be almost, if, because it seems the popes really are into unity nowadays, which I guess they should be. But I think, and my brother was the first one to tell me this, is a new missal, the removal of both the other missals, which is the Tridentine and the Novus Ordo, and the just establishing of one, which actually fulfills incarnate creed in terms of the Mass, the liturgical act of the Mass. I think that's what we really need. And then, so if you agree with that, the practical steps of that, honestly, this is why I don't like talking about this, because there's not a lot of practical steps. I think we can just be as reverent as possible in whatever mass we're in, whatever rite we're in, reverence for the Eucharist, showing that to other people, especially children. And this is going to be a topic by itself, but children, they see hypocrisy so well. I see this all the time. In a school mass, I'll go to a school mass and the teachers will be yelling at the kids like, "You're in church, true presence, shut up, pray." Sometimes they're literally yelling at them. It's crazy. But then right after that, or later on, the teachers will start talking to themselves in the church. And I don't know if they don't think this, but the kids see that and they're like, "You're yelling at me to shut up," but then right after you're talking about what you're going to do after work in church, right before mass or during mass or after mass, not usually during mass, but before and after in the church, the kids are going to see that hypocrisy, and that's going to be scandal for them, for sure. I know I wasn't really exposed to the Catholic Church much when I was a kid, but with other things, I saw hypocrisy, and I would resent whatever the topic was of the hypocrisy, and also the people involved in it. Like, you're saying this is important, but you're not acting like it's important, but you're making me act like it's important, and you start to resent that. So I think that's a whole part of the Mass and the Incarnate Creed. But the best thing we can do, action item wise, is we can be the people that act that certain way. Even when you get pushback, you will get pushback. People will, like, for example, if you kneel for the Eucharist, which I think is a very reverent act, and I do recommend it. Obviously, you do not have to. I'm not going to argue you have to, but I recommend it if you love Jesus in the Eucharist. This can be a very reparational in terms of how much hatred and calumny is directed towards the Eucharist, kneeling before Him, receiving. I think it's a great thing to do. But doing this, you will get pushback. Yeah, I've gotten pushback from priests, from other people being like, "Oh, stop wasting our time. You're so pious," et cetera, et cetera. And you'll have to accept that. I recommend, you don't really have to respond to that. If you are pressed on it, respond with charity, as always. But explain it's like, I want to reverence the true presence. And I think it aligns with my belief. This bodily act aligns with how I'm understanding it in my intellect. And hopefully people can understand that more, because I really think this is the key if we want to spread Catholic culture. is every single belief we have, because most people have the belief, they have the words down, but acting that out is the key. And this can really happen in the mass. Um, yeah. Other action items. Obviously, you can be talking to your priest because there is a little variability with how priests can celebrate the mass. I know probably different dioceses is different, how much flexibility they have, but like, and positive reinforcement I think is probably better than negative, but do as you see, which is best in your situation. But encouraging the priest when he does something that is not even traditional, but like reverential towards the Eucharist. I want to phrase it that way because a lot of people will phrase it like, "Oh, we just want to do everything because it's traditional." And I the sentiment I get, but like it, some of the traditional stuff doesn't make sense to do now. I was talking to someone the other day. It's like in the Trinity Mass, I love it. It's great, but like when they lift up the chasuble when he's going up the stairs, the priest, I'm like, it's fine if they do it, and I'm not against it. But like, they're literally telling me like you couldn't even get rid of that in the Tridentine rite. I'm like, what? Like that is an outdated thing. You could keep it if you want, but that has nothing to do with the mass. Um, and they're like, oh, it's like the sacredness of the chasuble. It's like, no, really, what they were doing before, to my understanding, is like the chasuble used to be super heavy. And so they're literally helping him up the stairs. There's a lot of different things like that where it's like, come on, guys, like this is very, and I'm not saying all the things, but some of the things is like very pharisaical, like washing of the hands, before the meal. It's like you don't really need it. It's not the essence, and it's not incarnational creed. But it's hard to talk to a lot of people about that. I love people when they love tradition, but sometimes it's a little crazy. I'm always right in the middle. But we think, and so when your priest does something reverential, in terms of the Eucharist, I think it would be good to let him know, like, wow, Father, we love your reverence for the Eucharist at this XYZ point in the Mass. We love that you encourage people to receive on the tongue, or whatever it happens to be. I think that can be very helpful. That's the small things we can do, because at the end of the day, it really comes down to the Pope, what the Pope wants to do. It came down to the Pope with the Novus Ordo. Like, it's funny, Pope Benedict, I think, was talking about, he's like, I don't want to do like a top-down thing in terms of the liturgy. But that's exactly what happened with the liturgy when we have the current situation we're in now, is it was a very top-down decision. So at the end of the day, it does matter to the Pope, but I think what the laity can do is, like, if there's a huge wave, the laity can have an influence in that way, in a cultural way. And obviously the new priests, bishops, and the new popes obviously will become from a new generation, a new community. And so that's the way we need to do it. And we need to do it in a joyful way, not in an angry way. I see a lot of people, they get really bitter and they're like white knuckling everything. And I've had that experience too with myself. I don't think that's the way to go. I do understand, the anger. People have expressed it to me. Like, I feel like my heritage and the traditions of my ancestors were ripped from me. And to a certain extent, that is correct. And I can understand the anger there. But we need to be charitable. We need to be gentle. But as we keep that steam going, and we also have to live a joyful life. Not saying like a happy-go-lucky life. There's going to be suffering, but in the face of suffering, we can be joyful and we can do good. And people will see that. People see when we endure hard things for the Lord, endure hard things for others. And it's inspiring, like movies. And I always talk about this. No one's inspired by like the selfish dude in the movie. They're inspired by Iron Man or whatever, giving up his life for other people. And as those things build up, it does affect people. And that's really how we want to affect people. We want to affect people one person at a time, one idea, one thought at a time, one act of love, one word of affirmation at a time. And that's how you get Christian culture. But if you haven't thought about it before, I really encourage you, in the Mass, like we've talked about before, is like entering in and saying to Jesus in the tabernacle, like, I love you, Jesus. I love you. I'm here. I know you're present here. And then in your body, right? Reverence, genuflecting. I've seen it, even people, this could be a lot, but like I've seen people, blow kisses to the tabernacle and different things like that. Don't get crazy, but to each his own. But just showing that love and that with your body, you are also acknowledging your intellectual belief that yes, Jesus is truly present there. Should I get into the third thing? I think I will. Wow, we're gonna do three topics in one, and as time goes on, if I hope to get pushback and or discussion so we can enter into these things more, but I'm just saying what's on my mind. So if you guys want to hear other things, you need to push back or you need to mention it in the comments. But the third thing I want to talk about was someone mentioned to me they're not Catholic, and they were talking about they thought it was weird how complex and what was the other word? I think complex, another word they used to describe the liturgical acts of the church. And I thought this is really interesting. I hadn't really thought about it before, but I was sympathetic to what they were saying. And they were talking about baptism and baptism in the Bible. Someone's like, I believe. And then, St. Paul or, whoever is just baptizing them if you're looking in the New Testament. And nowadays it's like you have a at least 9-month class usually. Even if you're getting your infant baptized, you have a class. It's this bureaucracy, which I understand why it exists, but it is a little annoying. And then when you get to the actual rite, like baptism, if you do a baptism for a baby, not, Easter Vigil or anything like that, it's almost like another mass. And I'm not saying those are bad things, but I do understand the sentiment. It's like, I just want that OG thing from the Lord. I want that baptism. And I want to understand it, obviously, but I want to just experience it. I don't need all this fluff. And to a certain extent, I understand. I know that the church has built up these traditions and we've gotten rid of some of them. And some people can argue that Vatican II is actually pushing back against like the complexity that had developed over time. Not that it was bad complexity, but this complexity that happened over time that maybe they felt the church or the council fathers thought that it was like almost clouding or disrupting people's understanding of what was really going on. And so Vatican II did get rid of a lot of little rituals in those things. And I've seen a baptism now in the Eastern, in a Melkite rite, in the Tridentine rite, and in the Novus Ordo rite. Is that correct here to say? In the Novus Ordo, I don't know if they're two different rites. I'm still confused on that. I don't think they're two different rites in those liturgical settings. And it is really interesting. Like the baptism in the Tridentine way was really cool, but I was also like the young kids that were receiving it, which they were old enough to know what was going on, but they were like really confused. The priest was having to say like, "Oh, I'm speaking in Latin now. I'm talking to the devil," and they're like, "Oh, okay. I thought I was getting baptized, but that's great too." So I'm sympathetic to that. I'd be curious what you guys' thoughts on that. I love anything that surrounds it that reinforces what's really going on, reinforces, new life, the forgiveness, washing away of sins, all that stuff, which I think the water does great. But maybe there's more needed. But anything that's like developed where it's like it's kind of convoluting the meaning and the sacredness of what's going on, I don't have any problem simplifying. And if it's keeping people from experiencing that in the Catholic Church, which I know that's not a good reason for them to do that, to not get baptized because it's too complex. But I'm sympathetic. Someone's like, I want to get baptized now. They're like, we'll wait 9 months. It's like, what? Especially if they don't know a lot of the stuff or they don't even know what they're getting into. Obviously, it's a different story. And I think the priest has some sort of jurisdiction over that where he can decide, oh, this person can get baptized now. But I guess this discussion is more about like a crystallization of the church in like a very bureaucratic time, and if whether that's a good or a bad thing. I'm not very bureaucratic, so I tend to think it's a bad thing, but I would be open to it being a good thing just because of the extensiveness, the worldwide stretch of the church, the complexity of all the things that have to be done, the lack of community. Obviously, people back then, a lot of people would have known each other, so it would have been easier to be like, oh, this person's in, this person's out. They know what they're talking about. They don't know what they're talking about. But it is an interesting topic, and someone just mentioned to me, so I wanted to mention it. And the idea that was Vatican II was a big push of that, just trying to be like, whoa, we've got a lot of random complexity that doesn't really have a lot of meaning anymore in the modern world. Do we want to simplify that down? And it just got out of control. I don't know. Those are good questions to ask. And I don't really see a lot of people talking about this stuff in terms of Catholic influencers, podcasters. So maybe I should, if you guys have any that are talking about this, let me know. But incarnational creed, how we need to act, how we need to be in the culture in relation to all these things, education, the things I talk about, education, the mass, and then the other liturgical rites surrounding the other sacraments. But yeah, it's probably one of our longest episodes. So I'm going to sign off here. Hopefully you found that interesting. I know it's like very broad overview, but in the future we can get more into it. But hopefully you enjoyed. I hope you like, subscribe, please. Subscribe. It really helps. And comment, give me some questions, comments, concerns. And yeah, that's the show. And I will see you next time. God be with you and God bless you. Good night.